So, transoceanic exploration, as you can see, and I'm excluding, we got a lot to go over. Yay! I'll try to be short winded. Sorry in advance. All right. First dude we're going to talk about. This guy here is Prince Henry the Navigator. He never actually he got on a boat maybe like 3 times in his entire life. He was a Portuguese king who invested in developing a navigation school in the mid 1400s. He founded exploration along Africa, looking for a way into the Indian Ocean. And one of the first ones was Bartolomeo Diaz, was tasked with rounding the tip of Africa. And he learned winds and currents that will help with future exploration. And he uses the winds to follow the westerlies. Later on, he uses the westerlies and lands on Brazil. Like, oh. And then claims it for Portugal, and then easterlies to make it back to southern Africa, around Namibia. So if you look at the map, this is his 1487. A little bit later in the 1500s, he goes, oh yeah, you can see the house. So he'll come around here, go, oh wow, cool land, and then come back this way using the winds. And it was actually faster than going against the wind backwards this way. And that's what they were learning, that there are trade winds to gather. And that's what we call them trade winds, is for that reason, is that they are used mainly for trading vessels because it's faster to take those routes. So anyway, they start learning, though, as you can see, the trade winds, westerlies, and how these interact. Which leads us to the first guy. Cristobal Colon, that's his probable first name, or real name. We say Christopher Columbus because English, and, right. So that's a painting of him done after his death and then assumed of what he looked like. No one really has a better picture or portrait of him. His later in life stuff is not really positive, and you already know that. So, right on. He's born from a Genoese trading family, so he's Italian, by the way, in case you know that. Many of the monarchs, he went all across Europe asking, hey, fund me. I'm going to go just straight west, and I'll find the Asia. And everyone's like, you're crazy. And he's like, no, we're good. Trust me. Little expected he'd ever be successful, mainly because Columbus was purposely miscalculating the size of the Earth. Not that the Earth was flat, but that the Earth was smaller than it was. And we kind of already knew, well, I say we, the collective knowledge at the time, kind of thought he was estimating the numbers pretty poorly. So, for example, the Earth was about 20,000, he said the Earth was 20,000 miles in circumference. And instead of almost the exact figure by the ancient Greeks, which was 25,000 miles. So 5,000 miles, that's not too shabby. That's just almost 1 2/3 of North America from, us to California is roughly 3,000. So he kind of really bumbled that up. So on his trip, he goes all the way to the first islands here is Hispaniola, Santo Domingo later on, and parts of Cuba. So estimates a population of about a million. Go all the way down to 1,200 alive on Puerto Rico by 1530. So these islands, all 3 of them, get wiped out of all native populations by the end of Spanish exploration. And early, 1530 is a large reduction. First, mainly through just enslavement, and he was searching for gold. So he'd see these natives, and he'd be like, cool, oh, you guys have shiny? I want shiny. And the natives are like, we don't have much gold. And he says, yeah, you do. I can see some. I want gold. When islands like Cuba didn't have any gold reserves whatsoever, they demanded they brought him gold, and if they didn't, they'd lose their hands. But one at a time. And I know I'm not trying to be glib. Like, First time you don't have one? Okay, chop your hand off. Oh, you gave us some gold? Here's a necklace. There you go. And it basically was a tab that says, I get one maiming free. Like, you don't get murdered for this. But they come in another time and says, oh, you only have one? Boom, there goes your hand. So that's how they treated some of these native peoples. On his third voyage, he ends in accusations of his mismanagement, and he returns to Spain in chains. And he appoints his brother as well to one of the positions. And it's actually one of the longest court cases in history, is that his descendants fought the Spanish crown for what they promised, and I believe he was supposed to get an 1/8 share of all things found in the places he discovered. An 1/8 share of everything from Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, and Cuba would amount to quite a nice sum. And I think that court case was finally settled either in the 18 or 1900s. But his original deal for all of this was contractual rather than like just straight up, here's my profit. It's percentage take of these places. He dies thinking, of course, he discovered the mainland and thinking all of that he found his route to Asia. And these are really just early Asian islands rather than an entirely new place. So you've already hopefully read about how wonderful he was, so we can keep going. Next up is Vasco da Gama of Portugal. So he rounds all the way back the Cape of Good Hope and set sail towards India. Now, he couldn't find a pilot to take them to India because everyone distrusted them. Go figure that. And so he finally went to Mozambique. He dressed as a Muslim, and his goods were not valued enough by the Sultan. They were coming trading some of their best stuff, and the Sultan's like, that crap sucks, yo. And they were like, fine. And they yeeted out from there and went on somewhere else. But they grew suspicious and were forced to flee because they realized these guys probably aren't Muslim and don't know what they're talking about. So they go up the coastline, here's Mozambique, to Mombasa, which is right in here somewhere. And they started raiding unarmed Arab ships trying to find someone to take them. Us. Oh my goodness, I'm not part of this either. They got a nasty reception everywhere they went from that case. So obviously raiding ships and saying, give us a pilot to take us to India didn't go so well. So finally they go to this town, Malindi here, and feuding with Mombasa. So hey, an enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? So they find a pilot who will then take them to Calicut, India. And a nice quick little voyage, boom. By the way, with the monsoon winds, that voyage right there across, that was only something like 2 to 4 weeks-ish. It was a really short trip. Coming back when they went outside of monsoon season took them about 3 months. So when they get to Calicut, they're greeted by the king. You know, this is always a good sign if you're not white with a bunch of new guys showing up telling you we're going to talk to you. And so shows up in Calicut, and their goods, once again, were not good enough. The Calicut, the Indians there were like, your stuff is crap, once again. And so instead they realized they didn't have gold, they didn't have silver to trade. So they took some captives and figured out that they could just, show up with cannon. So embarrassed through this, they returned to Africa. They ignored the advice to wait for monsoon winds. So, like I said, their trip to India took a little bit more than 3 weeks. Their return just to Africa took 4 months. And then on their return to Portugal, they lost half of his men. And 2 of his 4 ships were lost from all of this. Now, they brought just back a little bit of spices. These 2 small little chests of spice paid for the entire trip, as well as funded several yearly trips from then on. And I'm talking a little, no bigger than a third of the size of your desk, and that's spices in it. But those prices for those things went so high that all that amount, that got them enough. So they sailed back with an armada, and this time they decided the best way to trade is to opening up your cannons and bombing the coastline until they got tribute and whatnot. So that's what they did. They started just bombarding the side in this area that was not armed at all, and in one example, they burned a pilgrim boat. So a bunch of Muslims were trying to make their way to Mecca, and there were 400 pilgrims on board, 50 of them women. They took the ship and burned it with everybody on it. So these are definitely not the best examples here of good stuff. So yeah. That's the Portuguese interaction along the coast there. Ferdinand Magellan. So, Portuguese dude who the Portuguese didn't want to fund. After the Treaty of Tordesillas, they basically divided Europe or the world between the Spanish and Portuguese interests. And so here you have this lovely gray line, and then they realized though that there's some other part to Asia, and they needed to fix that one too. So they created this line here as well to see what side is what. Now, the trick was though, if the Spanish realized that they could find anything on this side of the ocean, on the Pacific side, they could lay claim to it before they created another peace treaty or another treaty dividing up that line. So they were all enthused about sending some dude all the way around, and that's what they did with Magellan. Because of this, though, Brazil, once again, Pedro Alvarez Cabral was sailing along West Africa and route to India, and uses the strong trade winds, goes over, discovers Brazil for Portugal, and so Portuguese have the claim of most of the coastline of Brazil. And they wanted someone to circumnavigate, the Spanish wanted someone to circumnavigate the world to find what's on the other side and where the Portuguese interests stop in the Pacific. So they hire Magellan. He goes through the Straits of Magellan, which is named after him now. This is the strait, all of this. And while it seems like, well, why don't you just go around to this tip? You see this icy stuff and all of here? Generally speaking, 50 degrees north and south of latitude are some of the worst waters to try to sail in the open ocean. Storms are really bad. The cold, the ice, ice on the rigging, ice on the sails can do a lot of damage. So they decided to go through the straits as a better way of travel and bear it. So to give you an idea of what those straits look like, here are some modern vessels in terms of the waves that they encounter in the Strait of Magellan. So as you can see, with this lovely image, I know it's not the most high quality, but that is a boat with lots of water on it because of these waves. So it is definitely one of the not so safer areas to travel. He manages it and goes through. He is the first European to discover the Philippines, though dies in a meeting of a hostile tribe, though maps the Philippines. So here's where he dies, around there. The interesting thing, though, is his little grudge against the Portuguese. When he maps this region, he maps the Philippines on this side. So the Portuguese think that they never will lay claim to the Philippines. The Spanish claim of the Philippines is going to change all of this and actually help bring down the Ming Dynasty. We'll talk about that with the silver trade. So this is a big, nice mess. Of the 5 ships that actually, one of the 5 ships of his voyage returns. Here's different depictions of him being murdered. These are, of course, all very westernized because he was meeting with a hostile tribe. We think he was trying to settle some disagreements or something. But all of these, if you look, here's one where he's just getting stabbed in the back apart from his troops. That's not very likely. Here he is fighting 3 dudes at once. Also not very likely. And then you have him in the middle of the waves, like falling back with natives, like point blank arrows. I don't know how many of you are archers, but that's usually not what you do, but not judging. So anyway, lovely depictions of poor defenseless or poor innocent Westerner and, oh my goodness, evil non-Westerner. So anyway, like I said, one of the 5 ships that went, one of them returns, and they were 1 day ahead in the date when they returned to Spain. So they figured something was going on, and that's kind of where we had the idea of maybe the Earth doesn't have the same time all the way around. So who knew? Jacques Cartier. We're going to go pretty quick because you got some of him already in reading. He explores the Americas to find gold, spice, and what's called the Northwest Passage, which will be a amazing white whale, if you will. There's a Moby Dick reference for those who don't know. Trying to find a way through the northern areas into Asia and the Pacific. And there isn't one because there's all these islands you can maneuver, but most of them have ice sheets on them. So the answer is there is none. In fact, it's only till recently, thank you, we can say it's human industry that did this one with global warming, as there's now actually holes we can drill into the ice and thin enough ice that we can use the Northwest Passage year round. So, hey, look, progress. Yay. Anyway, he goes up the St. Lawrence River. Quebec and Montreal are places he founds as trading spots. Names the place Canada and made claim to most of the French side of Canada, which is down the St. Lawrence and then into the Ohio Valley and the Mississippi and all that. Another Dutch explorer, his name is Henry Hudson. He too was obsessed with finding the Northwest Passage. He finds his first voyages. Now, he's obsessed with finding a way to India. So his first voyages, I smile because this is also one of these stories. He kept trying to go up north of Scandinavia and all the way across Russia. And every time, ice would stop him. And he's like, guys, we're so close. And all of his sailors are like, dude, no. We don't need to die. And he's like, no, come on. We're right there. And they're like, no, we're not. You're nuts. And they threaten him with mutiny to bring him back. And so after a couple times like this, he's not getting all the love he's expecting. Basically, his men got exhausted and it got too cold and too much ice that it returns him to the Netherlands. He does go one way, misses too far down, and voyages all the way into Nova Scotia. He goes into the New York and goes up the now Hudson River and comes back to the Netherlands, and on his way back he's captured by the English. Surprise, they were actually at war, and so he was trying to get supplies, but in terms he was seized and ordered not to work for the Dutch. So the English then hired him to find another one, and they found the Hudson Bay Company as well to help him out. So, no, sorry, not yet. That's ahead of time because he doesn't found the Hudson Bay. He goes in here and he discovers the Hudson Bay, thinking there's a Northwest Passage. Now, they winter here for, might have been 2 years. I think, let's see what I write down. Yeah, he gets wintered there in 1611. And after getting wintered there, he's like, okay, guys, we're ready to keep going. And his crew's like, no, we're going home. And he's like, no, it's really right there. All we need to do is go a little bit further. And his crew's like, we just stayed and starved and suffered in Canada in the winter. We're out. And no. So they actually did mutiny him and put him on a rowboat with his son and some of the ones that were loyal to him, and the rest sailed back to England. So this is the last anyone's ever seen and depicted here of Henry Hudson. And he was left stranded. They don't have any record of what happened to him. There's a possibility he might have survived with the native tribes, but we still don't know. Okay. So that's part one of explorers and whatnot. These guys, these were the explorers. Now I'm going to stop here and talk about, in the next video, we'll talk about the conquests.
Look at all those chickens!